So, I want you to start by thinking about the very first time you ever drove a car.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a core memory for most people.
Right. Like, you knew the absolute basics. You knew what a gas pedal did. You knew the brake.
You understood the theory of it, sure.
Exactly, the theory. You understood that, turning the steering wheel turns the tires. So, on paper, you understood driving perfectly.
But on paper is very different from reality.
So different. Because the second you pull out of that nice empty parking lot and you hit real traffic, what happened? You completely froze.
Oh, yeah, white-knuckling the steering wheel.
Yes. You were rigidly gripping the wheel, just hyper-analyzing every single micro-movement. You're completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information coming at you.
Just total sensory overload.
Right. And today, for this deep dive, we're looking at that exact terrifying paralysis, but not behind the wheel of a car. We're looking at it in the way we communicate.
Which is such a fascinating parallel, because that freezing sensation you're describing, it's actually the universal physical symptom of a brain being forced to process complex, high-stakes information entirely manually.
Manually, like without any autopilot.
Exactly. When you first learn a skill, nothing is automated yet. You don't have that muscle memory to rely on. So you're operating entirely from the conscious, analytical part of your prefrontal cortex.
Which takes a lot of effort, I'd imagine.
Oh, it requires an enormous, completely unsustainable amount of cognitive energy.
And that energy drain is exactly what we are reverse engineering today, because we are exploring this really fascinating gap between knowing the rules of a language, the theory, and actually possessing the real rhythm of fluency.
Right.
And we're basing this whole discussion off some incredible source material. It's a masterclass program called PodZone.
Yeah, the PodZone material is excellent.
It really is. And it's specifically built to take intermediate English learners and elevate them to what is known as C2 advanced fluency.
Right, and just to give you some quick context on that term, C2 refers to the absolute summit of the CE-FR scale, which is the common European framework of reference for languages.
A highest level.
Exactly. It's the stage where a speaker isn't just, competent or functional. They are communicating with the exact nuance, the emotional precision, and that effortless rhythm of a highly educated native speaker.
So they aren't translating anymore.
No, not at all. They're simply thinking and existing in the language.
Which means, and I think this is crucial for you as the listener, this conversation today isn't just for someone studying a second language.
Absolutely not.
Right? Like if you want to be a more charismatic or persuasive or just a more grounded communicator in your own native tongue, the psychology behind this transition is a total goldmine.
Oh, for sure. It applies to everyone.
Because the creators of this masterclass make this really provocative claim right out of the gate. They say that true magnetic fluency is rarely about having, like, a dictionary-sized vocabulary.
Yeah, that's a huge myth.
And it's almost never about flawless grammar either. It is really about emotional precision, strategic pacing, and human connection.
Which completely upends the traditional academic model of language learning. I mean, for decades, the focus has been on what they call the grammar trap.
The grammar trap. I love that term.
It's so accurate, right? Because students spend hundreds of hours just hunched over textbooks, drilling verb conjugations, memorizing endless flashcards.
I think it'll just click one day.
Exactly. They operate under this assumption that if they just acquire enough raw data, fluency will somehow spontaneously happen.
Like a math equation.
Right. But the reality of human neurology just doesn't work like that. The biggest differentiator between that mechanical, rigid, intermediate stage and C2 mastery is actually the ability to process natural language comfortably.
Without panicking.
Without panicking and responding without those excruciating panic-inducing pauses. Well, let's look at the neurology of that panic, actually. Because why does someone who genuinely knows, say, 4,000 vocabulary words still just completely freeze up when a barista asks them a slightly unexpected question?
Yeah, it all comes back to that cognitive load we mentioned earlier. Intermediate speakers are trapped in what linguists call a mental translation loop.
Okay, walk me through that. What does that loop look like?
Okay, so imagine the physical sequence occurring in their brain during just a basic interaction. Someone speaks to them. The intermediate learner hears the English words.
Right.
They route those auditory signals to the language center of their brain, translate them word for word into their native language, and comprehend the meaning.
Which is already a lot of steps.
And we're only halfway there. Then they have to formulate a response in their native language, translate that response back into English, and run a rapid internal diagnostic check on the grammar.
Oh, man. Like, wait, is this past tense? Do I need a plural here? Exactly. Did I use the right preposition? And only then, after all of that, do they signal their vocal cords to actually speak.
That sounds utterly exhausting. I mean, you're essentially running a high-speed UN translation booth inside your own head for every single casual interaction.
You are. And the human brain simply cannot sustain that kind of latency in real-time social dynamics.
Because conversations move so fast.
Right. A normal conversational gap between two native speakers is measured in fractions of a second. But that translation loop, that takes 2 or 3 full seconds.
Which feels like an eternity in a conversation.
It really does. That delay creates awkwardness, which then creates anxiety. And that anxiety further degrades their cognitive performance. It's a vicious cycle.
So how do advanced speakers get around that?
Well, advanced speakers bypass this entire switchboard. They don't process language as isolated individual words anymore. They process and produce language in what we call chunks.
Chunks, okay, like pre-assembled blocks of meaning.
Exactly that. They rely on these rhythmic, holistic phrases that contain an emotional intent rather than building a sentence from scratch like a math equation every single time they open their mouths.
So the PodZone Masterclass actually provides a really clear illustration of this difference.
Yeah.
They ask you to imagine running into an old friend you haven't seen in years.
A classic scenario.
Right. And an intermediate learner who's trapped in that literal word-by-word translation mindset might construct a sentence like, "We did not meet for a long time."
Which is totally fine, grammar-wise.
Yeah, if you were grading that sentence on a written exam, it would get a perfect score, right?
Absolutely. The subject, the auxiliary verb, the tense, everything is mathematically correct.
But it feels incredibly cold.
Right.
It's technically perfect, but it's relationally dead.
Very robotic.
Yeah. Now, contrast that with the advanced C2 example they provide in the source. They suggest saying, "It's been ages since we last caught up."
No, that's so much better.
Right. On the surface, both of those sentences communicate the exact same logistical reality time has passed since our bodies were last in the same room. But the emotional resonance is completely different.
The contrast is really jarring when you put them under a microscope. "We did not meet for a long time" is purely informational.
It sounds like a status report for a meeting.
Exactly. It's sterile. But look at the architecture of "It's been ages since we last caught up." First off, you have the hyperbole of "it's been ages."
Which is obviously an exaggeration.
Right, but that exaggeration immediately lowers the formal guardrails of the conversation. It signals a relaxed, intimate tone. You aren't operating on a literal stopwatch.
And then there's the phrase "caught up," which honestly feels like the real heavy lifter in that sentence.
It absolutely is, because catching up is a deeply relational phrasal verb. To meet simply implies occupying the same physical coordinates in space and time.
Right, like a business associate meets. Or a suspect meets with a lawyer.
Yes. But to catch up implies this mutual exchange of life narratives. It carries an emotional history with it.
Like, I want to know what's happening with you.
Exactly. It signals to the other person, we share a bond, our lives have diverged for a moment, and I really want to bridge that gap. The flow of the sentence isn't just grammatically sound, it is emotionally inviting.
You know, it makes me think of the difference between a paint-by-numbers canvas and an actual artist mixing their own palette.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like intermediate language is paint by numbers.
Yeah.
You are given the structure, you are given the exact colors, and if you follow the rules perfectly, you get a recognizable picture.
It gets the job done.
It gets it done. It's technically correct,
Right.
but it's flat. It's rigid. You can literally see the lines. Whereas advanced fluency is when you finally understand the underlying color theory enough to just throw away the numbers.
You don't need the template anymore.
Right. You start mixing your own colors to capture the actual lighting, the shading, the specific mood, the exact moment you're in.
That is a highly accurate representation of the linguistic journey. I mean, the intermediate speaker's primary goal is survival.
Just getting through the interaction.
Exactly. Not making a mistake, staying within the lines. But the advanced speaker's goal is expression, matching the psychological weight of the moment.
But bridging that gap, moving from the safety of survival to the nuance of true expression, that requires a massive upgrade in the tools you're using.
It really does.
Which brings us to the next major concept the PodZone creators explore. Because if stepping away from that robotic translation is the first hurdle, the second one is developing an emotional vocabulary.
Which is huge.
It is. And this isn't just about sounding poetic at a dinner party. This has massive high-stakes implications, particularly in the workplace.
The professional environment is really where the limitations of an intermediate vocabulary become acutely visible.
Oh, 100%.
Because when an intermediate speaker needs to describe a complex situation or even just their own internal state, they tend to fall back on very broad primary color descriptors.
Like saying something is hard.
Right. They say a task is hard, or they say they are tired or happy. And the problem is that these broad terms lack the resolution required to navigate complex professional dynamics.
It's almost like trying to perform surgery with a butter knife.
That's exactly what it's like.
You might get the general job done eventually, but it's going to be really messy, and you completely lack the precision required for delicate work.
Yes.
And the masterclass sets up this brilliant workplace scenario to demonstrate this. So imagine your manager pulls you into an office and hands you a massive, highly complex, cross-departmental project.
A really intimidating assignment.
Very intimidating. It is a defining moment for your career trajectory.
And in that specific moment, your manager is heavily scrutinizing your reaction.
Right, they're watching you closely.
They are looking for signals of your professional maturity, your self-awareness, and your capacity to handle pressure.
And the source points out that an intermediate communicator who is trying to express the very real apprehension they're feeling might look at the manager and simply say, "I am nervous."
Which is a natural feeling.
It's totally natural. But a C2 advanced speaker feeling that exact same internal flutter might instead say, "I'm a little intimidated by this project."
And the psychological distance between nervous and intimidated is just vast.
Let's break that down. Why is it so different?
Well, when you tell your manager, "I am nervous," you are describing a purely internal emotional fragility. You are talking about the anxiety in your own nervous system.
It's all about me.
Exactly. And in a high-stakes professional context, focusing the lens entirely on your own internal anxiety unintentionally signals that you might be unequipped for the pressure.
Because it makes the challenge a you problem.
Precisely. Your manager now subconsciously feels they have to manage your emotions alongside managing the project itself.
You're shrinking yourself down in the room. You're becoming a liability.
Right. But consider the strategic brilliance of the word intimidated.
Okay, yeah.
When you say, "I am intimidated by the scope of this project," you are taking the focus off your internal fragility and placing it on the external reality of the task.
Oh, that's such a good point.
Intimidated acknowledges that the mountain you are being asked to climb is objectively massive. It tells your manager, "I am not blinded by arrogance. I fully comprehend the scale, the complexity, and the risks involved here."
It projects this really grounded self-awareness. You aren't pretending the work is going to be easy, which would just be naive, but you are attributing the difficulty to the project's size, not your own lack of competence.
Exactly. It creates an aura of quiet confidence. You are essentially saying, "This is a formidable challenge, and I respect it." And that subtle linguistic shift completely alters your manager's perception of your readiness.
Okay, wait, let me challenge this idea of constantly reaching for more complex emotional words.
Sure, go ahead.
Is there a danger of overcorrecting here? Like if I'm always walking around the office saying I'm intimidated or completely drained or overwhelmed, don't I run the risk of sounding melodramatic?
That's a very fair point.
Because I feel like there's a really fine line between emotional precision and just sounding like you're in a constant state of crisis.
That is a vital distinction to make, yes. The goal of an advanced emotional vocabulary is precision, not escalation.
Precision, not escalation. Okay.
Melodrama occurs when the intensity of the word you choose exceeds the reality of the situation. So if you drop your pen and say, "I am devastated," that is melodrama.
Right. Or, "My coffee is cold. This is a tragedy."
Exactly. But if you have just worked a 14-hour shift managing a corporate crisis and you say, "I am completely drained," rather than just, "I'm tired," that is precision.
Oh, I see.
And precision actually prevents you from sounding like a crisis. When you use the exact right word to map your internal state, you sound stable, observant, and trustworthy. People trust communicators who can accurately diagnose a situation without inflating it.
That makes perfect sense. Precision grounds you in reality. Melodrama distorts it.
Beautifully said.
And this precision extends beyond just describing our own feelings, right? It fundamentally changes how we react to others.
No, absolutely.
Because the masterclass follows up that exact scenario with the next conversational beat. So, you've just admitted to a colleague that you were intimidated by the new project. And your colleague, trying to be supportive, looks at you and says, "You've got this. I'm sure you'll handle it well."
This is a critical micro-interaction.
Really?
Yes, it's a moment where a relationship can either stall out or significantly deepen.
Right. And an intermediate speaker who's acting on basic linguistic conditioning would almost certainly reply with a standard flat thank you.
Because that's what they were taught.
Exactly. But the advanced speaker is modeled in the course as saying, I really appreciate the encouragement.
And to understand why that second phrase is vastly superior, we have to look at the sociology of a thank you.
Okay, the sociology of thank you.
In most cultures, thank you is a transactional reflex. It is the linguistic equivalent of handing someone a receipt.
A receipt. Wow, that's so true.
You hand me a compliment, I hand you a thank you receipt. The transaction is complete, the loop is closed, and absolutely no further connection is required.
It acknowledges the exchange without actually requiring any emotional investment from me.
Exactly. But when you say, I really appreciate the encouragement, you are actively building a relational bridge. You're doing two very specific things here.
What are they?
First, you are naming the action the other person took. They didn't just speak words into the void, they offered encouragement. You are validating their effort.
Oh, I love that.
And second, you are articulating the internal impact that action had on you. You appreciate it. You are showing them that their attempt to support you successfully landed.
You're confirming receipt, but with emotion.
Right. It tells your colleague that you aren't just mechanically processing vocabulary, you are actively processing the social and emotional context of your relationship.
It turns a throwaway moment into an actual building blocks for trust.
It really does.
And it's fascinating because everything we've discussed so far, from replacing meat with ketchup to replacing nervous with intimidated, these are all scenarios where people are generally on the same page.
Yes, they are friendly, supportive interactions.
Right. But real fluency, like the kind of communication that actually tests your cognitive bandwidth, that doesn't always happen in a supportive vacuum.
No, it rarely does.
The real stress test is when you have to navigate friction.
Conflict resolution, or even just the simple navigation of opposing ideas. This is where the structural integrity of your fluency is truly tested.
Because the stakes are higher.
Much higher. It is where that cognitive load we discussed earlier spikes dramatically. Because now you are not just managing language, you are managing ego, defensiveness, and social hierarchy.
And when an intermediate speaker hits this huge spike in cognitive load, they tend to regress to the bluntest tools in their toolbox. Because they lack the linguistic nuance to dismantle an argument gently, they just use a sledgehammer.
They panic.
Yeah. And the masterclass highlights this with a very specific, very blunt phrase. You are wrong.
Uttering the phrase, you are wrong, in a professional or even personal disagreement, it triggers an immediate, involuntary physiological response in the listener.
Like an alarm going off.
It initiates a full amygdala hijack. The moment a human being hears that their reality is wrong, their brain perceives it as a literal threat to their status and identity.
Wow, just from 3 words.
Yes. Their heart rate elevates slightly, their defensive walls slam down, and they completely stop listening to whatever logic you present next. They are now in combat mode, preparing their counterattack.
So it completely derails the possibility of persuasion. You've turned what could have been a collaboration into a head-on collision.
Exactly. But C2 advanced speakers understand conversational architecture. They know how to disagree without triggering that biological defense mechanism.
And the masterclass provides some key phrases for this exact architecture, right? Things like, I see your point, but I have a slightly different perspective.
Yeah.
Or, I understand what you mean, although I look at it a little differently.
These phrases are masterclasses in tactical de-escalation. Let's break down the mechanics of just, I see your point.
Okay, let's do it.
By placing this phrase at the very front of your disagreement, you are preemptively disarming the other person's ego.
You're softening the blow.
More than softening it, you are signaling, I have actively listened to you. I have fully digested your reality. I validate your intelligence and your right to hold that perspective.
You are neutralizing the threat before you even introduce your own idea.
You are removing the friction. Once a person feels genuinely heard and validated, their neurological defenses relax. They become significantly more malleable and receptive to the but or although that invariably follows.
You've paved a smooth road for your counter-argument, rather than trying to just drive it straight through a brick wall.
Exactly.
And the masterclass gives a very practical demonstration of this during a discussion about remote work.
Oh, the work from home debate?
Right. Very relatable. So one of the hosts in the source is asked for her opinion on working from home. And she doesn't just blurt out, it's great or it's terrible.
Which would be those binary intermediate responses.
Exactly. Instead, she structures her thought using a very specific framework. She says, well, on the one hand, it gives people more flexibility and saves commuting time. But on the other hand, some people become less productive at home.
The on the one hand. On the other hand, framework. It is an essential tool for advanced cognitive framing.
Really? Why is it so effective?
Because when you deploy this structure, you force yourself, and more importantly, your listener, into a posture of intellectual objectivity.
How does it do that, neurologically speaking?
Because it demonstrates that you are capable of holding two opposing realities in your working memory simultaneously without feeling threatened by either of them.
Oh, that's powerful.
It signals to your audience that you are not a rigid ideologue pushing a singular agenda. You are a nuanced, deliberate thinker who has surveyed the entire landscape of an issue before arriving at a conclusion.
It makes you sound so much more reasonable.
It instantly elevates your perceived intelligence, fairness, and authority in any negotiation.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
That's hard.
If I'm leading a team, or if I'm in a really high-stakes negotiation, doesn't constantly relying on phrases like, I see your point, or on the one hand, kind of make me sound incredibly wishy-washy.
A lot of people worry about that.
Right. Like, if I need to project decisive leadership, I want to sound confident. I don't want to sound like I'm constantly apologizing for having an opinion or like I'm unwilling to take a firm stand.
It is a very common trap. Many people mistake bluntness for strength and politeness for weakness.
Yes, exactly.
Right. But true advanced fluency avoids the wishy-washy trap through the clarity and the weight of the follow-through.
The follow-through.
Yes. The soft introduction, I see your point, is not a concession of your own belief. It is merely a gateway. The true strength of your leadership is demonstrated by how effectively you guide the room after you've opened that gateway.
You know, I think of it a lot like a martial art.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, if someone lunges at you with a strong, opposing opinion, and you meet them with blunt force like, if you just yell, no, you're wrong, that is a violent clash. Someone is going to get bruised, usually both people's egos, and the whole conversation just stalls out.
Absolutely.
But using this soft disagreement architecture is kind of like practicing Aikido.
Yes.
Instead of meeting force with force, you accept their conversational momentum. You validate their energy with, I understand what you mean. And then, without breaking contact, you smoothly guide that momentum toward your own perspective.
That is a phenomenal visualization.
Right. You aren't being weak or wishy-washy at all. You are actually exerting complete fluid control over the direction and energy of the interaction.
You are redirecting the momentum rather than trying to blindly block it. And, maintaining that fluid, unbroken momentum in a conversation brings us to what might be the absolute most anxiety-inducing aspect of communication for any human being.
Oh, I think I know what you're going to say.
The dead silence.
The dreaded awkward pause. We've all been there. You're talking to someone, they drop a piece of completely unexpected information on you, and your brain just completely flatlines.
You just freeze.
You freeze.
Yeah.
And what usually comes out of your mouth is a painfully flat, ugh.
The O response is literally the sound of a conversational engine stalling out.
That's the worst feeling.
It is. And the pod zone creators emphasize that a core tenet of advanced fluency is the use of strategic conversational fillers and active empathy to prevent those drop-offs.
We use a highly relatable example in the course, actually. Imagine an acquaintance looks at you and says, I finally quit my job last week.
Which is a massive life event.
Massive. If you just reply to that with, oh, or okay, you haven't just dropped the conversational ball. You've essentially dismissed their entire reality.
You have offered zero emotional processing. The masterclass suggests that an advanced speaker, utilizing active empathy, would immediately respond with something like, wow, that must have been a difficult decision to make, or I can only imagine how stressful that situation must have been.
Let's really dig into the mechanics of that. When I say that must have been a difficult decision, what is actually happening beneath the surface of the conversation? Like, why does that feel so much better to the person who just quit their job?
Well, we are looking at the psychology of validation through active listening. When someone shares a vulnerable piece of information, they are subconsciously looking for confirmation that their emotional experience is justified.
They want to know they aren't crazy.
Exactly. Saying, I can only imagine how stressful that must have been, accomplishes several complex psychological tasks simultaneously.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, it proves you are not just passively hearing their words, but you are actively comprehending the gravity of their action.
You're paying attention.
Right. And second, it demonstrates profound emotional empathy. You are verbally stepping into their shoes and articulating the emotional weight they have been carrying. You are doing the emotional heavy lifting in the conversation for them.
You're creating a safety net. You're telling them, I recognize the magnitude of what you just said. It is completely safe to expand on this story, and I am here to catch you.
Yes.
It completely eliminates the isolation of just a flat "oh."
Exactly. But the dynamic really changes when you are the one put on the spot. The masterclass outlines a strategy for handling tough, unexpected questions where you don't instantly have an answer.
Oh, this is my absolute favorite part of the psychology we're exploring today. They use the example of a host asking her co-host, "What's one decision you regret?"
What a question.
Right. That is an incredibly heavy, philosophically deep question to get hit with out of nowhere.
It requires immense cognitive processing. I mean, you have to scan your memory banks, evaluate your past choices, select a regret that is actually appropriate to share in the current social context.
Because you don't want to overshare.
Right. Then you have to formulate a coherent narrative and finally prepare to deliver it.
And an inexperienced speaker, feeling the unbearable pressure of the silence that follows that question, will often just panic.
They feel this intense societal pressure to answer immediately.
Immediately, yeah. So they start stumbling, stringing together incoherent half-sentences, or they just exhibit full deer-in-the-headlights paralysis.
It's painful to watch.
But the advanced speaker deploys a very specific set of time-buying phrases. The host, in the example, handles the question by saying, "That's actually a really difficult question. To be honest, I've never really thought about it deeply before. If I had to choose something, I'd probably say," and then she delivers her thoughtful answer.
This is a brilliant, almost invisible tactical maneuver. We can classify this as a time-buying or buffering technique.
Buffering, I like that.
What the speaker is doing is deploying pre-automated linguistic chunks. Phrases like, "That's actually a really difficult question," or, "to be honest," require virtually zero cognitive effort for an advanced speaker to produce.
Because they've said them 1,000 times.
Exactly. Their mouth can say those words on complete autopilot, but while her mouth is engaged in producing these automated buffers, keeping the conversational space filled, engaged, and free of awkward silence, her brain is frantically working behind the scenes.
Doing the real work.
Right. She is giving her brain a 2 to 3 second cognitive runway. In those vital few seconds, her hippocampus is executing that complex memory search. She maintains the complete illusion of effortless, unbroken fluency while executing an intense internal calculation.
I absolutely love the idea of a cognitive runway. It really makes me think of the loading icon on a streaming video.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Think about it. When you ask someone a tough, deep question, their brain literally needs time to buffer the data for the answer. If they just sit there in dead silence, staring blankly at you for 3 seconds, it feels like the video player has crashed.
You think the connection is lost?
Yes. As the person asking the question, you start panicking. You wonder, did they hear me? Did I offend them? Are they angry? The silence breeds anxiety.
It really does.
But when the person uses a conversational filler, when they say, "Wow, I've never really thought about that before," that phrase acts exactly like the little spinning loading icon on your screen.
It's a signal.
It communicates to the listener, "I haven't crashed. I received your input. I am actively processing it, and I am currently buffering a thoughtful response. Please hold." It immediately relieves the tension for both people in the room.
The social loading icon is a perfect modern analogy. It manages expectations and maintains the interpersonal connection while the processing happens. It's a true hallmark of high emotional intelligence.
So we've broken down the neurology of translation, the psychology of emotional vocabulary, the architecture of disagreement, and the empathy of the strategic pause.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. But the final dimension the PodZone creators explore shifts away from what is happening in the brain and focuses entirely on the physical mechanics of the body.
Right.
Because how you physically deliver your words profoundly impacts how your fluency is actually perceived.
Yes, the physicality of speech is a vital and often really overlooked component. To address this, the masterclass introduces a physical training practice known as shadowing.
And for anyone who hasn't encountered this technique, shadowing is a physical exercise where you listen to an audio recording of a native speaker and you pay microscopic attention to their pronunciation, the rise and fall of their pitch, the exact rhythm of their phrasing.
Little detail.
Every detail. And you try to speak aloud along with them, repeating what they're saying almost simultaneously. It's almost like singing along to a song on the radio, but for spoken word.
The biomechanics of shadowing are fascinating. It is a highly effective pedagogical tool because it forces the learner to circumvent the analytical brain entirely.
So you're bypassing the grammar trap.
Completely. You aren't analyzing grammar. You are physically training the neuromuscular pathways in your jaw, your tongue, and your vocal cords.
It's a workout.
It is. You are building the muscle memory required to naturally produce the cadence and musicality of the language. It treats language like a physical sport, like practicing a tennis swing, rather than a math problem.
Now, the master class provides a specific paragraph for listeners to use for this physical shadowing exercise.
Yeah.
And the content they chose for this paragraph is just incredible.
It's very purposeful.
It really is. The speaker in the audio reads a short reflection saying, "There was a period in my life when I constantly doubted myself and my abilities. Whenever I made mistakes, I immediately became discouraged. But over time, I realized that confidence is not something people are born with. It's something that develops gradually through experience, repetition, and persistence."
And after the listener completes this shadowing exercise, the master class highlights a crucial takeaway regarding the actual delivery of that paragraph. The host explicitly points out that the native speaker reading the text did not speak overly fast.
No, they took their time.
They were very deliberate. And this addresses one of the most pervasive misconceptions in all of communication: the speed myth.
The speed myth. This is a trap that almost every single professional falls into at some point, whether they are speaking a second language, pitching a client, or just giving a quarterly update to their team.
It's everywhere.
We have this deep-seated subconscious belief that talking a million miles an hour equals mastery. We think, if I can just fire these words out of my mouth as fast as possible, it proves my brain works incredibly fast, it proves I know the material inside out, and no one will be able to interrupt me or question my expertise.
It is a very prevalent illusion, and it is driven entirely by anxiety. However, from a psychological and sociological standpoint, speaking at a rapid-fire pace almost always achieves the exact opposite of its intended effect.
It backfires.
Completely. It rarely projects mastery. It projects deep, deep insecurity.
How does the audience actually perceive it, though, when someone is talking way too fast?
Well, when someone speaks at an unnaturally rapid pace, the audience's mirror neurons pick up on the underlying frantic energy.
They can feel the stress.
Right. The speaker sounds nervous, breathless, and desperate to unload their information before someone takes the floor away from them. It signals a severe lack of status. Furthermore, speed actively destroys emotional expression.
How so?
If you rush through a sentence, your vocal cords literally do not have the time to alter pitch or volume to emphasize the nuances of your words. You completely flatten the emotional landscape of your speech.
You know, it's like watching a beautifully directed movie, but putting it on 2x fast forward.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You might intellectually comprehend the plot points, like who went where, who said what, but you strip out all the dramatic pauses, the subtle facial expressions, the heavy sighs. You completely lose the emotional impact of the acting. The data gets transferred, but the human connection is lost.
That is precisely what happens to the voice. Deliberate pacing, on the other hand, projects immense grounded authority.
It draws people in.
It does. When you take your time, when you articulate your consonants clearly, when you allow for natural, unhurried pauses between your thoughts, you are implicitly communicating a very powerful message to your listener.
What's the message?
You are telling them, what I have to say is highly valuable. I belong in this room, and I am entirely comfortable commanding this space and your attention for as long as I need.
That is true confidence.
Exactly. The Podzone creators correctly identify that at the ultimate C2 advanced level, the focus completely abandons speed and becomes entirely obsessed with clarity, resonance, and emotional expression.
I also just want to point out the absolute brilliance of the specific text they used for that shadowing exercise. It is incredibly meta.
Oh, yes.
Right. The exact paragraph they chose to have listeners physically repeat over and over again to practice their physical speaking skills is literally a paragraph about the psychological persistence required to develop confidence.
The medium is entirely the message. It is a beautifully constructed psychological loop.
It's genius. The text tells the learner, that confidence develops gradually through experience, repetition, and persistence. That doesn't just apply to overcoming self-doubt in life. It is the literal blueprint for surviving the agonizing journey of language fluency.
It's universal.
It is. Whether you are learning English from scratch, or you are a native speaker trying to become a more compelling public speaker, or you are just trying to learn how to navigate high-conflict conversations with your partner, pacing yourself gives your words weight. But to get to that effortless pace, you have to persist through the awkward, paint-by-numbers phases.
You have to embrace the awkwardness.
You really do.
Yeah.
You have to push through the moments where you freeze and want to just say, you're wrong, instead of doing the hard work of building a conversational bridge.
And that persistence is the only vehicle that can carry you across the gap between the intermediate plateau and advanced mastery. You cannot hack or rush the development of that internal rhythm. It requires the courage to be awkward until you become graceful.
So, as we bring all these incredibly diverse threads together today, let's look at the final synthesis the masterclass leaves us with.
Let's do it.
We have completely deconstructed the robotic translation loop and replaced it with the natural rhythm of chunks. We have seen how upgrading from primary colored descriptors to a precise emotional vocabulary like swapping nervous for intimidated fundamentally alters how your maturity is perceived in a room.
Huge difference.
We've learned the Aikido of soft disagreement, the deep empathy of the buffering pause, and the undeniable authority of slowing down your physical delivery.
And the creators of the masterclass tie all these complex psychological and physiological mechanics together with one final, very vital mindset shift.
What's the shift?
They leave their listeners with a common idiomatic phrase. At the end of the day, they use this idiom to anchor a profound truth about communication. At the end of the day, advanced fluency is not a final static destination of absolute crystalline perfection.
It's not the finish line.
No, it is not a mythical state where you suddenly stop making grammatical errors forever.
Which is such a massive relief to hear. It dismantles the perfectionism that keeps so many people frozen in fear.
It really does.
At the end of the day, even the most advanced speakers, even native speakers who have spoken the language for 50 years, make mistakes. We conjugate verbs incorrectly when we're tired. We completely blank on the name of a person we've known for years.
We stumble over our words all the time.
Exactly. We walk into complex professional situations where we have to learn new industry jargon on the fly. We are constantly adapting. The central thesis of the entire Podzone philosophy is that the true goal of communication is never an error-free performance.
You are not a machine.
Right. You are not a machine executing a perfect line of code. The goal is connection, self-assured confidence, and authentic expression.
It is a fundamental paradigm shift. It moves language out of the realm of an academic subject to be graded and places it in its rightful context as a fluid, living tool for human connection.
Which is what it was always meant to be.
Precisely. Every time you actively listen to a colleague, every time you practice pacing yourself, and most importantly, every single time you stumble, make an awkward mistake, and recover from it with grace, you are actively forging your fluency.
Building that muscle.
The final call to the listener is an urge to practice profound self-compassion. Mastering any highly complex neurological skill is built step by agonizing step. But the compounding interest of that daily persistence pays off immensely, changing not just how you speak, but how you relate to the entire world.
It is a continuous journey of growth, not a sprint to some impossible standard of perfection. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, I like a provocative thought.
We have spent this entire time unpacking the mechanics of a masterclass designed for people learning a second language. And we've established that true, undeniable advanced fluency is actually very rarely about possessing a flawless command of grammar rules.
Yeah.
It is heavily dependent on demonstrating active, profound empathy. It relies on utilizing exact emotional precision.
Absolutely.
It requires the ability to balance conflict gracefully without bruising egos, and a self-awareness to pace your thoughts and buy cognitive time when you need it.
Yes.
Well, if those are the true underlying metrics of what makes a person an advanced communicator, is it possible that many of us aren't actually practicing advanced fluency, even when we are speaking our own native language every single day?
Wow. That is a great question.
It is something to deeply consider the next time you catch yourself in a meeting, feeling defensive and bluntly saying, no, you're wrong, instead of taking a breath and saying, I see your point, but I look at it differently.
It takes practice.
Or the next time you get home from a brutal day, and you default to the basic primary color of saying, I'm tired. Instead of pausing, analyzing your internal state, and realizing that you are actually completely drained. Until next time, keep exploring, keep listening, and keep finding the right words. Think about the last time maybe an argument at work or even just a disagreement with your partner just went completely off the rails.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
Right. Like you were presenting facts, they were presenting facts, and then within, 2 minutes, everyone's blood pressure is spiking.
Defensive walls just shoot straight up.
Exactly. And suddenly the actual topic of conversation is just entirely lost. But, and this is what we're getting into today, what if that conflict wasn't actually caused by the facts you were arguing about?
Right. What if it was something else entirely?
Yeah, what if the catastrophic failure of that conversation came down to just a few microscopic, totally invisible transition words that you just forgot to use?
It's honestly a terrifying thought, but linguistically speaking, it is entirely accurate. I mean, we spend so much time obsessing over the core data we want to transmit, right?
Oh, 100%. We prep the bullet points.
But we spend almost zero time examining the psychological delivery mechanisms of that data.
And that brings us to the hidden blueprint we've got our hands on today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We are looking at a piece of source material that is, well, on its face, it seems highly specific.
Very niche. Yeah.
Right. It's an excerpt from a masterclass titled C2 Advanced English, The Art of Masterful Expression. And it's taught by these two instructors, Emma and John, from a platform called PodZone.
And just for those listening who might not be super familiar with language grading systems, C2 is it's the absolute summit of the Common European Framework.
That's the top tier.
The absolute peak. It represents near native or honestly even above average native mastery of the language. It is the realm of extreme nuance.
Well, the wild thing is, reading through their transcripts, their role plays, the instructional dialogue, something entirely different emerged for us.
Totally.
This isn't just a grammar lesson for non-native speakers. I mean, it is a masterclass in human empathy. Emma and John are basically sort of inadvertently deconstructing the fundamental psychology of how we connect.
How we de-escalate tension.
Yes, and how we articulate the most complex parts of the human experience.
They're outlining the difference between treating language as this sterile transaction of data and actually using language to express an authentic, vulnerable self.
Which applies to literally everyone.
Exactly. Whether you are a language learner or someone who has spoken English since birth, this applies to you.
So that's our mission for today's deep dive. We're going to tear this blueprint apart. We're going to examine how these instructors teach people to soften their opinions, label their internal emotional states with absolute precision, and, fundamentally alter their own reality just by swapping a noun for a verb.
It's gonna be eye-opening.
I promise you, by the end of this deep dive, you're going to look at your daily text messages, your boardroom presentations, your late-night kitchen arguments in a completely different light.
Well, the best place to start is exactly where the source material starts, which is managing the friction of external human interaction.
Right, the outer world.
Yeah, it's what we might call the diplomacy of disagreement.
The instructors, Emma and John, they make this fascinating point right out of the gate. They tell their C2 students that advanced communication isn't about, memorizing a thesaurus so you sound smart.
Right. It's not about big words.
It's about interacting respectfully. And the tool they highlight for this are these tiny linguistic buffers that they call transition phrases.
Yeah, they focus really heavily on phrases like, to be fair, at the same time, as far as I'm concerned, and in my experience.
Right. And they illustrate this with a role play about a highly polarizing topic, which is social media.
Oh, always a calm discussion.
Always. So Emma asks John if social media is good for people. Now, if this were a basic English class, or frankly, if this were just your average Twitter argument, John would just say, yes, it is good, or no, it is toxic.
Very black and white.
Exactly. But instead he says, well, to be fair, it helps people stay connected. Emma doesn't just counter with, you're wrong. She says, that's true. At the same time, I think excessive use can become unhealthy.
Which then leads John to conclude, as far as I'm concerned, balance is the most important thing.
It's so smooth.
It is smooth, but let's look at the underlying mechanics of what just happened there, because it is profoundly sophisticated. The instructors point out that avoiding absolute yes or no answers makes a speaker sound really mature.
Right.
But we have to understand the biological and the psychological mechanism at play here. When you deliver a blunt opinion, like if you just walk into a room and declare, social media is destroying society, you are presenting your subjective thought as an objective universal law.
You're basically backing the other person into a corner right away. Like if they happen to enjoy social media, you haven't just attacked the app, you know?
Yeah.
You've attacked their judgment.
Precisely. You trigger an immediate amygdala response in the listener.
Fight or flight.
Exactly. The ego perceives an absolute statement that contradicts its own reality as a literal threat, and it immediately goes on the defensive. But look at the phrase "in my experience," or as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
By deploying those words before your opinion, you're intentionally framing your thought as a localized perspective.
Okay, but I kind of want to push back on that slightly, though. Because doesn't constantly couching your language with, as far as I'm concerned, or to be fair, doesn't that run the risk of sounding maybe passive-aggressive? Or even worse, like you lack conviction?
That's a fair question.
Like at what point does this kind of diplomacy just become avoiding the truth?
So that is a crucial distinction, and I'd argue it depends entirely on the intention behind the phrasing. It becomes passive-aggressive when it's used as a shield to hide an attack.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but Emma and John are teaching these phrases as tools of genuine exploration. When you say, "in my experience," you are not weakening your conviction. You're actually making your statement unassailable.
Wait, really? How so?
Because I cannot debate your personal experience. Think about it. If you say this policy is a disaster, I can fight you on the data. I can pull up charts.
Right, we can argue the facts.
Exactly. But if you say, "in my experience, my team has struggled with this policy," I have to lean in and listen to your reality. I can't say, "no, your experience is wrong." It invites a shared exploration rather than a gladiator match.
Oh, wow. Okay, that makes total sense. It completely neutralizes the threat. I was actually thinking about this earlier, and it reminds me of the suspension system on a car.
Oh, I like that. Walk me through it.
So think about the core argument you want to make as the destination you're driving to, right? And the conversation itself is the road.
Okay.
If you don't use these transition phrases, so if you have no suspension,
Yeah.
you're still driving down the exact same road, but every pothole, every point of disagreement is going to violently rattle the passenger.
Right. It's a terrible ride.
It's an awful ride. You're going to make the person you're talking to sick, they're going to get angry, and ultimately they're going to want to get out of the car. But if you use, "I agree to some extent," but, or to be fair, that is the suspension absorbing the kinetic energy of the conflict.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Yeah, you still navigate the exact same controversial terrain, you still reach your destination, but you don't char the passenger. The ride stays smooth.
That analogy perfectly captures the utility of the pod zone lesson. The structural integrity of the car, meaning the truth of your argument, remains totally intact. But you are artificially engineering a smoother ride for the human nervous system sitting next to you.
And if you're listening to this right now, I'd encourage you to audit your own recent arguments. Like, how many times did a conversation stall out completely, not because your core idea was flawed, but because you delivered it with absolutely zero suspension?
Just zero shock absorbers.
Exactly. You delivered an opinion as a universal edict, and the other person simply refused to endure the rough ride.
It's staggering to think about how many relationships could be improved just by adding a conversational shock absorber.
Totally.
But as we move deeper into the source material, the focus actually shifts. Emma and John don't just care about how we manage our external conflicts with other people.
All right, the masterclass turns inward. It starts looking at how advanced speakers manage and define their own internal reality.
This is where we move from diplomacy into what we could call the color palette of emotion. The lesson transitions into the art of paraphrasing internal states, specifically focusing on moving way beyond primary, basic emotional labels.
Yeah, the instructors highlight that a truly fluent speaker doesn't just walk around saying, "I am tired," every time they feel a dip in their energy.
Right, they don't just use the baseline words.
They use a much higher resolution vocabulary. They say things like, "I'm exhausted," or "I'm completely drained," or "I feel worn out."
And to ground this, they introduce a workplace role play. John asks Emma how a recent meeting with her manager went.
And it was an absolute disaster.
A complete ambush.
Yeah.
Emma explains that she walked in expecting, routine praise, but instead she was met with heavy, unexpected criticism.
Right.
Very. But the critical takeaway here is how she describes the aftermath. She doesn't just say, "I was surprised and now I am tired." She says, "The feedback caught me completely off guard. I'm completely drained from the stress."
Caught me off guard. and completely drained. The source material really, really lingers on these phrases, and I feel like we need to unpack the underlying biology of why these specific words matter so much.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the gap between tired and drained isn't just about trying to sound smart, is it? It's about accurately reporting what is actually happening inside your body.
Exactly. It's the difference between diagnosing a scraped knee and internal bleeding. Let's really look at the imagery here. Tired is a biological baseline. It's a naturally occurring metabolic state.
Like when you go to the gym.
Right. Go for a long run, your muscles deplete their glycogen, and you are tired. You rest, you recover. But drained, that word inherently implies that you are a vessel.
Oh, wow.
It suggests that you contained a finite volume of vital energy or emotional bandwidth or resilience, and an external force has violently pulled the plug. You haven't just expended energy, you have been emptied out by stress.
It captures the psychological toll, not just the physical need for a nap. And then there's caught off guard. Again, if I walk into a room and get a surprise birthday party, I am surprised, but I'm not caught off guard.
Because surprise is neutral. It's just a sudden pivot in expectation. But caught off guard, linguistically speaking, has martial origins. It belongs to the vocabulary of combat and defense.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. It implies that you had a protective stance. You were navigating a professional environment with your shield up, and a threat slipped past your defenses and struck an unarmored vulnerability.
Now, that carries a massive weight. And it forces me to ask this question. Is this the exact moment where language stops being just a tool we use to describe the world and starts acting as a high-fidelity mirror for our own nervous system?
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Because if I tell myself I'm just tired, after a brutal meeting, I might just drink a cup of coffee and try to push through it. But if I admit to myself I am completely drained and my defenses were breached, well, that demands a totally different kind of self-care.
You've hit on a core principle of cognitive psychology here. The precision of your vocabulary directly dictates the ceiling of your self-awareness. Our nervous system literally reacts to the nuance of the labels we give our feelings.
That is wild.
If your emotional vocabulary consists only of mad, sad, glad, and tired, you are fundamentally mislabeling your physiological reality. It's like you're trying to paint a masterpiece with a box of 4 broken crayons.
That's such a good visual.
Right. When you experience the profound psychological emptying of being undermined by a boss, and you label it as merely being tired, you are actually invalidating your own trauma.
So for you listening, this is a massive challenge. Look at the default labels you use when someone asks how you're doing. How often do you default to those primary colors? Like, I'm stressed.
Right. Everyone says they're stressed.
Are you just stressed, or are you overwhelmed? Are you frustrated, or are you disillusioned? Because if you don't have the words to accurately define the internal weather system you're experiencing, you have absolutely no hope of navigating it.
Which brings us seamlessly to the necessary evolution of the source material. Once you possess the vocabulary to accurately label your present emotional state, you suddenly unlock the cognitive machinery required to meaningfully process your past.
Yes. The instructors call this out explicitly. They note that as your language becomes more advanced, your conversations naturally deepen. You stop just discussing the logistics of your day, and you begin discussing life experiences, the passage of time, personal growth.
Exactly.
And the specific framing phrases they teach their C2 learners for this are looking back, and the older I get, the more I realize.
They anchor this with another great dialogue. Emma observes that John seems much calmer and wiser these days, and John responds by saying, "The older I get, the more I realize that peace of mind is more valuable than constant stress and competition."
Emma agrees with him, noting she used to, burn herself out trying to prove her worth to everyone. But now she uses this incredible phrase, looking back, I realize how much I've changed. Now I'm trying not to be too hard on myself anymore.
It is really worth noting that John, the instructor, literally pauses the lesson to call that specific phrase beautiful and advanced. I'm trying not to be too hard on myself anymore. We need to dissect why this is considered the absolute pinnacle of advanced expression.
Well, let's look at the mechanics of it. First off, it requires profound self-awareness, because you first have to acknowledge that there is a critic living inside your own head.
Yes, the recognition of the internal monologue. And notice the active present participle, trying. It does not say, I have stopped being hard on myself, which would imply this magical, permanent cure.
Like you flipped a switch.
Right. Trying indicates an active, ongoing, daily friction. It acknowledges that self-compassion is a verb, not a destination. It is the deliberate, conscious cessation of self-criticism.
But none of that emotional processing happens without those initial framing phrases, like let's look at looking back. It acts like a linguistic bridge across time.
It creates psychological distance. When you're traumatized by a mistake or a period of really high stress, you are often merged with that past version of yourself. You still feel the shame intensely.
It's like you're still living in it.
Exactly. But when you consciously force the phrase looking back out of your mouth, you are building a safe observation deck. You are firmly planting your current, wiser self in the present and merely observing your past self as a separate entity. It's actually a technique used in cognitive behavioral therapy, embedded right here in an English lesson.
I'm just fascinated by the idea that the grammar itself forces the reflection. Think about it. You literally cannot use the phrase, the older I get, the more I realize, without simultaneously offering a moment of extreme vulnerability and synthesizing some kind of hard-won wisdom.
That's very true.
Like you can't say, the older I get, the more I realize that I prefer blue over red. I mean, it violates the unwritten social contract of the phrase. The syntax demands depth.
It acts as a conversational beacon. When you use that phrase, you're signaling to the person across from you, hey, we are now leaving the shallow waters of small talk. I am opening a window into my personal growth, and I'm inviting you to do the same.
It's so powerful. But I do want to challenge this idea of achieving peace of mind just a bit.
Okay, lay it on me.
Emma says she's trying not to be too hard on herself. But arriving at that realization isn't some serene overnight enlightenment. It's usually the result of hitting a wall over and over again.
No, absolutely.
And the Pod Zone instructors clearly understand this because the very next phase of their lesson completely abandons that serene reflection of the past and dives straight into the messy reality of the present.
They pivot directly to articulating the struggle. Because life is saturated with concepts that sound incredibly simple in theory, but are brutally difficult to execute in reality.
The instructors introduce a classic idiom for this exact tension. It's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But the real goldmine here is a specific structural replacement they demand of their students. They explicitly tell the learners to stop using the phrase, I have a problem, and replace it with, I've been struggling with.
And to illustrate this, they use a dialogue about the frustration of learning a new skill. John talks about the theoretical knowledge he knows that improvement takes time and patience.
Right.
Emma validates the agonizing reality of that by saying that staying patient is easier said than done, which then allows John to reach a reflective resolution. He says, I've come to realize that consistency really changes everything.
I really want to spend some serious time analyzing this word replacement, swapping problem for struggle. Because at first glance, honestly, it just sounds like corporate HR speak.
Yeah, it sounds a bit buzzwordy.
Right. It sounds like someone telling you to call a weakness an opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
So is this just empty rebranding, or is there actual psychological weight to this change?
There is immense psychological weight, and it roots back to the field of cognitive linguistics, which studies how language directly influences our neurological processing of reality. Let's contrast the morphological weight of the two words.
Okay.
A problem is a static noun. It's an object. It is heavy, it is negative, and it basically sits in your path like a massive boulder. Furthermore, you say, I have a problem. You possess it, it becomes an appendage to your identity.
It sounds permanent. Like if I go to my boss and say, we have a problem with the timeline, I'm essentially walking into the room and dropping a bomb on the desk. It induces immediate panic.
Exactly. It frames you as a passive victim of a static obstacle. But look at a struggle, especially when it's used as a continuous verb. I am struggling with.
Feels different.
A struggle is dynamic. It implies forward motion. It implies that you are in the arena, you are wrestling with the issue, exerting energy. It acknowledges the extreme difficulty of the situation, but it fundamentally contains the possibility of eventual triumph. You don't triumph over a static object, you triumph by outlasting a struggle.
Wow, this completely shifts the locus of control. If I go to my boss and say, I am struggling with a timeline, I haven't dropped a bomb, I've sent out an invitation for collaboration.
Yes.
I'm saying I am actively fighting this issue, but I could use some reinforcements.
It is a radical reclamation of agency. When you say, I have a problem, you identify with the deficit. When you say, I am struggling with, you identify with the effort. You're framing yourself as an active protagonist trying to overcome an obstacle, rather than a passive casualty of a flaw.
And easier said than done is just the ultimate conversational partner to that struggle. If I come to you and say, I am struggling to manage my time, and you say, well, just wake up earlier, how does that make me feel?
It makes you feel instantly defensive and, frankly, invalidated, because my advice treats your struggle as a simple equation that you are just too lazy to solve.
Right. But if I deploy the phrase, you're right, waking up earlier is the logical answer, but with a newborn baby, it is easier said than done, I've done something incredible there.
You've threaded the needle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have validated your advice so I don't trigger your ego, but I've simultaneously honored my own reality that the execution is agonizing. I build a bridge instead of a wall.
It's masterful. And for the listener, this might honestly be the most immediately actionable takeaway of this entire deep dive. The next time you encounter serious friction, whether it's a failing project at work, a toxic habit you're trying to break, or a recurring argument in your marriage, audit your language.
Just catch yourself.
Catch yourself before you say, I have a problem. Actively force your mouth to say, I am currently struggling with. See if it changes your psychological posture. See if it restores your sense of agency in the face of the obstacle.
I genuinely believe that one shift could change the trajectory of someone's entire week. But here is the massive caveat to everything we've discussed so far.
Uh-oh, the catch.
The catch. Knowing the mechanics of diplomacy, having the high-resolution vocabulary for your emotions, understanding the psychological distancing of wisdom, and reframing your struggles. All of this theory is completely useless if you cannot access it in real time.
That is the truth.
Like if you are sitting in a high-pressure meeting, furiously trying to remember which transition phrase to use, the moment is already gone.
You suffer from cognitive overload. The analytical brain just cannot process real-time emotional connection and linguistic translation simultaneously. Which brings us to the most mechanical yet totally fascinating part of the Pod Zone Masterclass.
Yes. How do Emma and John actually teach their students to internalize these tools so that they become automatic, involuntary reflexes?
They introduce a practice called active shadowing. The explicitly stated goal here is to help learners produce advanced English naturally, completely bypassing the mental lag of translating in their head.
Right, getting it out of the textbook.
They argue that mastery isn't just about knowing the definition of a word, it is about the physical flow of the sentence, the connected speech, and the emotional intonation.
And the specific exercise they select to demonstrate this active shadowing is just brilliant in its design.
It really is.
So Emma reads a short narrative paragraph to the listeners, and they are instructed not just to read along, but to actively mimic her rhythm, her breathing, and her emotional tone. And the text she chooses isn't a dry news report about economics.
No, it's very visceral.
It's an intensely personal story about overcoming the sheer terror of public speaking.
She describes a scenario from a few years prior where she had to deliver this critical presentation. And she doesn't just outline the event. She details the visceral physical symptoms of her panic.
Right.
Her hands were physically shaking. Her heart was racing in her chest. She was absolutely terrified of being judged.
But the narrative arcs. Once she begins speaking, she realizes the audience isn't hostile. They are actively listening and supporting her. And the story concludes with this profound feeling of relief and being genuinely proud of herself for basically walking through the fire of her own fear.
We really need to analyze why shadowing this specific kind of emotional narrative is radically more effective than traditional rote memorization. Shadowing is fundamentally an exercise in somatic mimicry.
Somatic mimicry.
Yes. You are not just observing language. You are physically embodying the pacing, the vocal cord vibration, and the respiratory patterns of the speaker.
I want to challenge this a little, though, because a lot of people might look at shadowing and say, well, you're just parroting. You're just acting. How does pretending to be Emma help me access my own vocabulary in a real argument?
That's a very common critique.
Like, why does this work better than just writing genuinely proud on a flashcard 50 times?
Because traditional flashcards rely exclusively on cognitive, declarative memory. You are asking your prefrontal cortex to store a sterile data point. But when you shadow, you're engaging the entire nervous system.
Oh, wow.
You're training the motor neurons in your jaw and tongue, you are syncing your breath to the phrasing, and critically, you are firing the neural pathways associated with the emotion being expressed. It bypasses the analytical brain entirely. You are moving the language out of the cognitive realm and downloading it directly into the physical body. It is somatic learning.
Getting the language into the muscle memory. And this explains the genius of the source text. They intentionally chose a story about panic and pride. Emotion acts as a biological fixing agent for memory.
Exactly.
If you practice a neutral sentence like, I don't know, the bank closes at 5, your brain doesn't care. But if you have to physically put the terror of shaking hands and a racing heart into your voice, and then physically exhale into the relief of being genuinely proud, you are literally attaching a physiological state to the syntax.
That is exactly it. You're teaching your nervous system, when we feel this specific kind of relief, these are the exact physical words our mouth produces. So later, in a real-life scenario, when you actually feel proud of overcoming an obstacle, your body remembers the physical shape of the phrase genuinely proud, and it produces it automatically.
Without the analytical brain needing to search a mental dictionary.
Without any lag at all.
It's incredible. But, it also presents a beautiful paradox, which is exactly where Emma and John conclude their masterclass. You spend all this time intensely mimicking someone else, copying their breath, their tone, their exact phrasing, purely so that you can eventually discard their voice entirely.
Yes, that is the ultimate goal of the entire curriculum. Authentic self-expression. True fluency, they explicitly state, is not about becoming a perfect clone of a native speaker. It's about removing the friction between your internal reality and your external communication.
Right, and making it yours.
It is about expressing your specific thoughts, your unique emotions, and your complex ideas with absolute clarity.
The instructors describe this almost magical threshold that learners cross. They say that English stops feeling like a school subject, something you just study and test yourself on, and it quietly transforms into a real, invaluable tool.
Right.
They advise the learners to take it one step at a time, because this kind of profound fluency develops silently in the background. You don't get a certificate on the day it happens. You just wake up one day and you speak without overthinking.
And John models this perfectly in his closing remarks. He doesn't just say, "Thanks for listening." He intentionally deploys the phrase, genuinely grateful. He tells the audience that he and Emma are genuinely grateful for their support.
Yeah.
The instructors point out that this sounds immeasurably deeper than a simple thank you.
Let's look at genuinely grateful as the culmination of the entire deep dive. Why is that the perfect closing note?
Because it is the synthesis of everything we've explored today. It is structurally mature, avoiding basic primary color vocabulary. It is emotionally precise, specifying not just gratitude, but the authenticity of it. And it lands with a resonant impact that a basic phrase lacks.
It has weight to it.
It does. When you reach this level of mastery, when you no longer have to translate your diplomacy, when you can instantly label your exhaustion as drained, when you can fluidly articulate your struggle as an active process rather than a static problem, the language itself disappears.
The language disappears. The invisible conduit.
Yes. The words cease to be obstacles you are actively trying to climb over in real time. They become an invisible, frictionless wire connecting your mind to the listener's mind. The person you are talking to doesn't sit there and think, wow, what an advanced vocabulary. They don't hear the words at all. They just feel you.
I love this, and it brings to mind an analogy that I think perfectly encapsulates this entire journey.
Oh, I'm ready.
It is exactly like learning to play the piano. When you first sit down at the instrument, for years, you're just trapped in the mechanics. You are sweating over the sheet music, you're staring at your fingers, you're desperately trying to remember the scale.
You're overthinking every movement.
Exactly. You are mechanically playing someone else's notes, just terrified of making an error.
It is entirely cognitive and structural. The instrument is basically an adversary.
Right. But if you put in the thousands of hours of practice, if you shadow the masters, if you internalize the rhythms one magical day, the mechanics quietly fade away. You sit down at the piano and you don't even look at the keys. Your hands simply know where to go without your brain explicitly commanding them.
You start to improvise.
Yes. The piano stops being a machine you're operating and it becomes an extension of your own body. You stop playing the instrument and you start playing you. That is what Emma and John are actually teaching in this masterclass. They're teaching people how to play themselves.
That is the highest definition of the art of masterful expression.
So to bring this massive journey all together for you listening, we started this deep dive looking at what appeared to be just a standard C2 advanced English lesson. But we quickly realized we had our hands on the very architecture of human empathy.
We really did.
We journeyed from the outward diplomacy of disagreement, learning how to use transition phrases as conversational suspension systems so we don't violently rattle the egos of the people we are trying to connect with.
We then moved inward, examining the vital necessity of a high-resolution emotional vocabulary. We realize that labeling an emotional ambush as being caught off guard and drained reflects a completely different physiological reality than simply calling ourselves tired.
We explore the grammar of wisdom, recognizing how phrases like looking back allow us to safely distance ourselves from our past mistakes, creating the literal space required for genuine self-compassion.
We dismantled our static, heavy problems and radically shifted our locus of control by transforming them into active, dynamic struggles, which restores our agency in the face of hardship.
And finally, we saw how physically internalizing these emotional rhythms through somatic learning and shadowing is what eventually allows the mechanics to fade away, leaving nothing but your authentic, untranslated voice. It is a staggering reminder that if we want to improve our relationships, we can't just obsess over what we're saying. We have to meticulously examine the invisible mechanics behind how we say it.
It is a profound realization. But as we prepare to sign off, there is one final, lingering thought that this source material provoked for me. It's a paradox that wasn't explicitly discussed by the instructors, but it really shadows the entire curriculum.
You know I love a good paradox. What is it?
Well, the Podzone text teaches these highly intentional, empathetic, and diplomatic phrases specifically as a mechanism for non-native speakers to sound fluent. But it forces a very uncomfortable question.
It is.
How many native speakers actually use these tools of emotional precision effectively in their daily lives?
Oh, wow. That is a brilliant point.
Right. Those of us who speak our native tongue take it completely for granted. We don't study our own speech patterns. We speak purely on impulse and instinct. We argue bluntly without suspension. We constantly default to the basic primary colors of emotion, and we lazily declare that we have problems.
That's true. We get lazy.
The ultimate irony here is that by studying communication as a secondary conscious skill, an English learner is actively developing a level of empathy, tact, and psychological intentionality that the vast majority of native speakers will never consciously achieve.
So what you're suggesting is maybe the real secret to masterful, emotionally intelligent expression isn't about whether you're a native speaker or not.
Yeah.
Maybe the secret is that every single one of us needs to start treating our native language like we are a student of it all over again.
Precisely. To step back, look at the words we use every single day and ask, is this actually communicating my authentic self?
I cannot think of a more profound challenge to leave you with. Audit your words, treat your own language like you are a student of it, and see how much deeper and smoother your connections become. Thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.